Welcome to the BCUC podcast. We're so glad you're tuning in today, and we really hope you enjoy this message.
Hello. Oh, hi. Morning. Today's reading is from Psalm 112, 1 verse 10. Praise the Lord. Blessed are those who fear the Lord, who find great delight in his commands. Their children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever. Even in darkness, light dawns for the upright, for those who are gracious and compassionate and righteous. Good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Their hearts are secure. They will have no fear. In the end, they will look in triumph on their foes. They have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Their horn will be lifted high in honor. The wicked will see and be vexed. They will gnash their teeth and waste away. The longings of the wicked will come to nothing. This is the word of the Lord.
2 or 3 weeks ago, Benji preached on one of the Psalms, and this week I'm going to choose the Psalm that was set down for today, which is Psalm 112, because it has some really interesting messages, things that we're worried about today. So we're going to look at Psalm 112. But the first thing to say is that 112 is a pair with Psalm 111. Now, I'm not going to preach on 111 this morning, otherwise we'd be here all morning, but what I have done is I've set... can we have the first slide? Yeah. I've set you some homework, and that is when we've done Psalm 112, you can read Psalm 111 and see where it all fits in. Because what Psalm 111 does is it talks about God. It talks about God's character, and it talks about the things that God has done. And it also ends with suggesting that we should fear and obey him. So both of these Psalms are based on God's covenant with Israel, that if Israel obeyed him and held him in awe, then he would give them all sorts of gifts, both spiritual and material. That was the first covenant. Now, one of these Psalms, they're called the Wisdom Psalms, and if you look at Proverbs 9 to 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So we've got to look at what fear of the Lord means. But what the wisdom literature means is that it's not just a theological thing. The wisdom literature seeks to anchor these things in real life experiences, so you can take home from it something that you need to do, and that's what the wisdom literature is about. The other thing about these two Psalms is that they're poems. They were possibly written by David, and they're acrostic poems. And for those that have not come across what an acrostic poem is, it's one of those poems where the first letter of each line usually spells something out. So to give you an example, if Benji wanted to teach you 5 things about God that he wanted you to remember, then he might create an acrostic to help you do it. So he'd pick a word, and that would be, quite a reasonable word to pick, I guess, and he would say, God is the bearer of our burdens. God is the eternal Word made flesh. God is a name above all names. Jesus, our Saviour and King, and finally Emmanuel, God with us. And why would he do that? Well, the acrostic may help you to remember those 5 things, and that's what it's about. Well, these Psalms are acrostic.
Can I just stop you there? Except last week I preached on humility, and I probably wouldn't use that as my acrostic. time, okay?
Yes, but this week I'm preaching. So, no, look, so the thing about that is this acrostic poem has 22 lines in it. What does it spell out? Well, it actually doesn't spell out anything. What it is the first, it's the Hebrew alphabet, of which there were 22 letters, and it just goes down like that, but the purpose is the same. They made it acrostic so that people might remember each line of the psalm. So both psalms share that fact that they're all started by the first letter in sequence of the Hebrew alphabet. But the thing that we have to address first, given that the main theme is if you fear God, you may fear nothing else, is that there are two meanings to fear here. And fearing God doesn't mean being scared of God or being frightened of God. Fearing God in those terms that the Old Testament used it was a reverent awe of God, leading to delighting in a life aligned with God's will, because you held God in awe, so you gave him the appropriate honour to the nature of what God was. And as I've said, you can find out the nature of God when you read Psalm 111. So Psalm 111 teaches you the nature of God. Psalm 112 teaches you how we should react to that, what we should do. So fearing God is holding God in awe. The second meaning of fear, though, is the fear of being frightened. But it isn't being frightened of necessarily of simple things like the dark or whatever. It's that sort of paralysing fear that stops you moving on in life. I don't want to break out of familiar surroundings, therefore I'll not take that opportunity overseas or interstate or whatever. Or it's a fear of breaking away from people because they've been your support service, or there's all sorts of fears, or even the fear of public speaking. I'm not going to get up and do that because I'll melt if I do it. So they're the sort of paralysing fears that stop you moving on. Well, you don't need to have those if you hold God in awe and try and mirror the attributes of God in your own life. So when you do that, when you mirror the attributes of God in your own life, you delight in his commands and you try and live like God in the Old Testament. And what that will do is it will spread further than just your life. It'll spread to your family. They will be set an example. That doesn't mean your family will all end up following the path that you followed, but you've introduced it, you've brought people into that, and it will influence some of their lives even if they don't necessarily take it up in the way that you would. But you can't influence your family if you're not living that life yourself of trying to mirror God. But the other thing it will do is it will affect the whole congregation, people whose lives mirror God as we join together and support each other. That is a picture of this congregation. Some of you may remember it. It was the picture that I actually took on the first day that we worshipped together in this building. And so we were a congregation, and the important thing about Christianity actually is it is not a sole occupation. It is an occupation that we do in a community. People that say, oh, look, I don't go to church, but I'm a Christian because I can do it all myself, have missed the point about the sort of community that Christ was talking about, where we support each other and love each other and with the strength of unity show Christ's life to the world. And so anyone that does that is not only living a life that will live life to the full, which is what Jesus promised us, but they'll also be giving an example to their family of how to live life to the full and an example to their church. Now, the interesting thing, I said that this was the way they thought of things in the first covenant. And the reason that I talk about that is because when you read Psalm 112, you sort of get the impression that if you obey God, you'll get all the riches of this world. And that's the way they used to think about things. And remember a few years ago, We did Job for a couple of weeks, and Job, as you'll remember, lost everything. He lost his family, lost all his wealth, and so on. He was the devil, I think, spreading something toxic on Job, infecting him and so on with sores and the rest of it. But you see, that was interpreted by the people all of the day of being punished by God, because that's the way they saw things. If you did good stuff, you got rewarded by God. If you fell out of favour with God, you got punished. So that's not the way we see things today, because we now are under a second covenant after the first one was broken. The second one was Jesus Christ. And it doesn't have those promises that if you do a good job, you'll get rewarded. All we're asked to do is to have faith in Christ and to try and mirror his life in the world. And if we do that, that will be sufficient. As the previous song said, we glory in God, and that will be sufficient reward in itself. But even Psalm 112 hinted at the fact that you're not going to have this perfect life that doesn't lead to any challenges, because it sort of says there will be times of darkness, because it says you'll be able to get over times of darkness. You'll hear bad news, but you'll be able to get over hearing bad news. And you will have enemy. People that don't follow what you follow will try and take you down. They'll be enemies. So even in 112, it's not promising everything will be all right. It did promise that it'll be all right in the end, but it stresses that God is in control all the time. And sometimes you've just got to be patient about that. And the Old Testament is full of stories of people being patient, and Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat is a very good example of that in the Old Testament. Here he gets sold into slavery, he gets all sorts of awful things happen to him, gets thrown in jail and so on. Eventually becomes a sort of senior confidant in Egypt, and he's able to turn the tables and actually help his brothers out and protect them from famine and so on. But he had to be patient. He had to go through all the awful stuff that happened to him, but knowing that God was still in charge and God would eventually see that things were right. And indeed, the Jews in exile in Babylon, the same sort of thing. You're in exile, you've lost Jerusalem, everything's awful, but there's a finite period of time, and if you're patient enough to wait that time, it'll reverse and you'll be all right again. And of course they were. So why was I enamoured with sort of talking about Psalm 112? Well, one of the big problems today is this. Every time we turn on the news in the morning, apart from when there's the Winter Olympics on, of course, and that's all the news there is, but the rest of the time it's all bad news. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about world leaders who are being self-serving and unprincipled, or whether we're talking about wars that seem to have no resolution, whether we can't separate what used to be the good guys from the bad guys because they're all behaving as badly. There's threats of war escalating to nuclear war and so on and so on and so on. And we can become totally overwhelmed by that stuff. And Psalm 112 has the answer to that. Because I think you've all had the situation where you're overwhelmed by the things around you. I had an experience years ago when I was lucky enough to go to India. I was asked to train a medical oncologist to be the first oncologist at the Christian Medical College Hospital in Vellore, and we were going to bring him out to Adelaide and train him, send him back, which we subsequently did. But I thought I'd better go and visit and find out what sort of circumstances he was working under, and sort of interview him before we brought him out to Australia. And when I got to India, I actually had been at a conference in Paris, so I went from the sort of height of everything that was beautiful and expensive to India. And, you came across crowds of people. That's the fruit and vegetable market in Mysore. I mean, there's animals and there's carts and there's people and there's thousands of people trying to buy fruit and vegetables. And then there's just a couple of the streets in Vellore, where, again, crowded with people going about their everyday business. And some of them, it's a lot better these days, but when I was there about 30 years ago, when I first went there, there was very little guttering and the streets were rather grubby. And I thought, here am I thinking I'm doing something useful, and it's addressing a tiny little problem, and all the rest of it's happening. What do I think that I'm doing? This man in the corner really interested me as well, because it actually brought home to me that, the culture, the difficulty. This man was in the market selling used locks that he acquired from somewhere. And no one was taking much notice. People were buying fruit and vegetables and things, but no one was actually buying any of his locks. And I said to the person with me, I said, what's he, how can he possibly survive? Oh, they said, look, he'll only have to sell one lock a day and that will feed his family. But then they went on and said, if he sells 2 locks in a day, he'll have a good feed and start again from nothing the day after. So there was no sense in which he was going to plan ahead. He had to eke out a living every single day with what he did, or his family starved. And that was very confronting. I mean, yes, we were there to do something a lot higher tech than that, but, what we're going to do about the rest of it. And then I came to the realisation that, I could do what I could do, what I was trained to do and what I was asked to do, and what we subsequently did. And I had to rely on other people to do other bits of it. And the reason that I said to you that Psalm 112 has the answers is it actually says 2 things. One is it says, you are the light. If you follow and mirror God, or in our case with the second covenant, Jesus Christ, then you become the light to whatever, to your family, to your church community, to your wider community. And you've got to rely on everyone else that has the same feeling, being the light as well. And that's how the world gets re-illuminated. We can't take on all the world leaders. We can't solve all the world wars, but each of us can be the light of Christ in this world. And if there's enough of us, 180 here or something like that, plus all the others, if there's enough of us, we will slowly make the difference, and we'll make it in God's time, not ours. So Psalm 112 tells us that. We've got to be the light. We've got to. That's our response to God or to Jesus Christ. And what's more, those people that rail up against us, they will have no excuse for saying, I didn't know how I should have been behaving, because we've shown them how to behave. And so when their time of judgment comes, they'll be judged harshly, because they did have an example of how to behave in that world. Each of us must behave towards everyone else as Christ behaved towards us. Love each other, support each other, and so on. And if you take that attitude and you remember that you're working in God's time, not yours, then the overwhelming things of this world won't be overwhelming anymore, because you realise that God's still in control, and God has one thing for you to be, and that's to mirror Him, to mirror Jesus Christ. And that's how you attack this problem of a world that seems to have lost control, because God hasn't lost control, and eventually things will turn round. And each of us are the agents of that, and each of us together, 180 of us here, plus those online, each of us together can make an enormous contribution to our communities, and we can also, across the world, make that sort of contribution if we stick to what we want to do. So that's why Psalm 112 is such a wisdom psalm, if you like. And if you read 11, you'll find out what we're trying to mirror, and if you read 112, you'll find out that's what we're meant to do. So the Psalms are a really good thing to read visit from time to time because they have an enormous amount of wisdom about how to behave in this world.
Thank you for listening. We really hope you were inspired by today's message. You can also find us on YouTube and the Burnside City Uniting Church website.